Bozeman's glass towers caught the last amber wash of day. The mountains stamped on the windows like a warning. Inside Caldwell Biotech, the air smelled of citrus and new money. Amara Thompson moved in silence, a cloth in one hand, a trained eye on everything else. She noticed the CEO before he noticed the floor under him. Nathan Caldwell's voice boomed on the speaker, cutting through the room, then snagged. One word slipped, another stretched. He pinched the bridge of his nose, as if a bright needle had touched the center of his skull. His right thumb trembled against a silver pen. The pen clicked once, twice, then held still, only because he forced it. Amara paused by the credenza to straighten a framed patent. The reflection gave her an angle he couldn't see. In the glass, his pupils were uneven, a small, cruel detail. He blinked hard, missed the chair by an inch, and smiled to hide it. He reached for his coffee, hesitated, swallowed without drinking, as though his throat had turned stubborn. "Minor headache," he said, voice tight. "Keep the numbers moving." The call muttered back. Outside, the Gallatin Valley settled into an evening hush, and the office lights turned the room sterile. Perfect, indifferent. She set the bottle down. "Sir, please sit. You need to breathe." Calm, steady, clinical. He waved her off without a glance. Clean. That single word dragged like a boot through mud. He squared his shoulders, but his balance lagged half a beat behind his pride. The clock ticked. The hum of the vents felt louder than breath. Amara stepped closer, not to serve, but to guard. Training sharpened everything: the slur, the gaze drift, the tremor he pretended not to own. He despised her uniform. He needed her mind. What happens when the only person who can read the danger is the one he refuses to see? Bozeman woke under a thin winter light, mountains holding low clouds, while the glass of Caldwell Biotech threw back a hard sky. Inside, lemon cleaner and quiet ambition shared the air as Amara Thompson guided a cart along the corridor toward the executive suite. She moved with steady grace, eyes sweeping corners and reflections, collecting clues a room gives to anyone who looks. In Nathan Caldwell's office, blinds half drawn, spreadsheets glowed, and a silver pen waited near a cooling mug. She started her routine: dust, then polish, glass, then wood, habits left from a life where sequence saved lives. Nathan muttered at an email, reached for the mug, and set it down without drinking. His right thumb trembled against the handle. He stilled it with a flat palm and forced a breath through his nose. Amara noted the hesitation, the shallow swallow, and the way one word stretched when he rehearsed a line under his breath. She worked on, present yet blended into the decor by people who preferred not to see her. Years earlier, she had stood under fluorescent bulbs with a badge clipped to blue scrubs, a nurse trusted with codes and fragile hearts. One bitter night in Billings, she stabilized a crash victim by listening to the eyes and breath instead of panic. A month later, a narcotics audit raised flags, and a rumor sprouted without roots. Amara stole meds. Security found nothing. Yet, whispers hardened into policy, and a supervisor asked her to sign a backdated note to tidy a timeline. She refused. The hearing felt pre-written. Her license was not stripped, only buried under paperwork and silence. Shifts vanished. Bills remained, and pride does not feed a child or pay rent. She took cleaning work, promising herself it was temporary, only to learn that temporary can stretch until calendars forget old plans. What stayed were hands that knew how to watch, count, and listen. Those hands now cleaned a billionaire's glass while the man behind it ignored his warning signs. Nathan's reflection twitched in the window. He opened the wrong file, closed it, then reopened the same screen as if a loop had formed inside his head. "You missed a streak," he said, still staring at the numbers. "I'll fix it," she replied, because calm buys time and access. He rubbed a spot above his right eye, blinked twice, and adjusted his stance after standing too fast. She saw the sequence rise, sway, hard blink, recovery, and felt her chest tighten, then steady. A clock ticked toward a noon investor meeting. Amara emptied a bin and smoothed a mat, logging quietly inside her head. Tremor, hesitation, brief disorientation. She preferred ink to memory, so down the hall she took a half-minute to scribble in a pocket notebook. Thumb shake, wrong file twice, slow swallow, rub supraorbital area, slight postural sway, times noted. She did not assign a diagnosis. Patterns. Convince, returning, she found Nathan on a call. "Rerun those projections," he said, clipped, then soon repeated a question he had already asked. Leila Bennett appeared at the doorway with a tablet. He flicked a glance for permission, and she entered. Midway through her summary, his gaze slipped past her to nowhere. "Sir," she asked. He frowned and waved her off as if her tone caused the lapse. "Go finish," he said, and Leila left, cheeks tight. Heat rose at the base of Amara's neck, that particular burn when talent gets swatted because power refuses mirrors. She lifted a frame and wiped the edge. In the glass she caught his pupils wrestling with distance, one lagging a fraction. Near lunch, Alina Caldwell arrived in a wool coat, dusted with snow. Posture carrying hospital memory alert, economical, tuned to small changes. she set a bag on the table. "Nathan, you promised to schedule an evaluation," she said softly. He smiled without warmth. "I'm fine. Busy quarter." Alina read him the way nurses read a patient and a chart at once. "You forgot your keys yesterday and the passcode twice this morning," she said. "You're avoiding coffee, yet complaining of headaches. Please see someone." He straightened as if a camera had clicked. "Stop fussing," he said, "and stop recruiting staff to your campaign." He glanced at Amara, a dismissal wearing a grin. "You don't hover. Do your job. Just a janitor, right?" The words flicked an old scar. Amara kept her face calm and continued wiping an already clean surface because staying meant seeing, and seeing might soon mean saving. Alina kissed his temple and said, "I love you, which is why I'll keep asking." She nodded toward Amara with the slightest kindness, then left without a door slam. Silence returned, broken only by vents and the scrape of a chair. Nathan leaned to catch the pen. It rolled. He reached for 2 long beats. He stayed bent, as if gravity had grown denser. When he stood, he steadied himself on the chair, back and forced a casual shrug. Amara placed a sealed bottle of water on the edge of the desk. "In case you need it," she said. "I need quiet," he answered. She nodded and stepped away. Her notebook would hold another line. On the service stair, she paused by a small window above the loading dock. Gallatin Valley stretched under a whitening sky, a living barometer. She reopened the page to add, repetition on call, gaze drift, mid-conversation, delayed rise from crouch. Back on the floor, she vacuumed the corridor and let the motor's hum cover the sorting inside her mind. She thought about the audit, the rumor, the hearing, and the way guilt had been assigned because it kept other names clean. She also thought about the grandmother who had squeezed her wrist after a still night without alarms. Those memories held when pay stubs tried to shrink. Her worth, people change uniforms. Skill remains. Late afternoon pressed shadows against the snow. Nathan rehearsed his presentation, stumbled on 3 words, and laughed at himself too quickly. "Long week," he said to no one. Amara checked a small stain near the window, then allowed herself 3 honest seconds to watch him rub the same spot above his eye again. The motion looked ritual now. Training taught respect for repeated gestures. Bodies confessed through habit. She stacked coasters, aligned chairs, and gathered trash. At the door, he said, "If the glass isn't clear for the investors, facilities, we'll replace you." She turned the handle without answering, because dignity sometimes means not feeding a threat. In the hallway, she pressed the notebook against her ribs like a guarded pulse. She had one advantage the rumor had not taken, a mind that trusts evidence. Ignorance can be loud. Truth enters quietly and refuses to leave. Snow hissed softly against the glass all evening. Snow thickened by the time she clocked out. Cars whispered along Main Street, and the mountains faded to a gray sheet. She looked back at the building that paid her to erase smudges while overlooking the stain forming inside its leader. "Have you ever been ignored when you knew you were right?" She held the question like a match, refusing to blow it out. Tomorrow, she would return with the same keys, the same cart, and a plan. If doors stayed closed, she would find another route. Pride could wait. A life could not. Morning sagged under a low ceiling of clouds. The Bridgers bruised purple. Wind driving fine snow sideways across Bozeman as Caldwell Biotech's top floor filled with polished shoes, muted ties, and the hush that comes before money talks. Amara rolled her cart past the glass like weather passing a ridge, unnoticed, listening as assistants set up carafes, and the board filtered into the conference room with nervous laughter. Nathan stood at the head, jaw tight, cheeks pale despite the heater's steady hum. He practiced a line under his breath, stumbled on a clause, smoothed it with a chuckle that did not warm his eyes. Through the reflection, she watched the meeting begin. Lila Bennett projected charts. Nathan's pen clicked twice, then stayed under his palm. He squinted as if the room had grown too bright, though clouds kept noon dim. Amara tightened her grip on the cloth. Uneven pupils again, the right larger by a thread. She breathed through a knot of anger that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with how rooms like this had decided which eyes mattered. She inched the cart to cover. The way she watched, Nathan leaned on the back of his chair instead of taking the seat, shoulders stiff, neck unsteady, knuckles whitening as he steadied himself through a silent sway. Someone cracked a joke about weather delays. A few smiled. Nathan did not. He lifted his mug, hovered, then set it down without drinking. Amara noted the swallow that followed anyway, slow and deliberate, like a man rehearsing an automatic act. The CFO handed him a printed deck. He flipped a page he had already turned, doubled back, and frowned as if the paper had misbehaved. She logged the pattern inside her head. Then, when no one looked, wrote quickly on a folded notepad tucked into her apron. An isochoria slight, light sensitivity, hesitation with swallow, postural sway, confusional loop with document. She did not diagnose. She collected, quietly. Wind clawed at the windows, a sound like distant surf rolling off the plains. A storm warning pinged a phone. Screens lit with tiny red banners. Montana likes to argue with itself wide and harsh. beautiful and unforgiving, and today, the sky made that argument in real time while a different pressure built under the polished table. A junior analyst misread a number. Nathan's mouth tightened. "You're off by 2 decimals," he said, voice flat. The young man corrected himself, apologizing too fast. Nathan set his pen down with care that felt like a threat. "Details are oxygen here. You starve us. You're gone." The room froze. Lila shifted, ready to intervene, then stayed still. Amara saw a twitch along Nathan's right cheek, a microspasm that vanished the moment he clenched his jaw. She wrote, "Echolalia, pattern emerging. Check earlier notes." Timestamp. Her heart beat hard with the familiar mix of certainty and dread. Behind her, a janitor's closet door clicked as a colleague stepped out and nodded. Amara moved on cue 2. Replace a water pitcher, the simplest cover for the boldest observation. From the far side of the table, she could see Nathan's pupils more clearly. Left constricted, right sluggish. His left foot dragged a fraction when he shifted weight. The sole whispered against the carpet. The board resumed, voices swelling and thinning like gusts. Nathan's temper rose with the pressure outside. He cut off Lila mid-sentence, demanded projections he had already approved, then stared at the same slide as if he had never seen it. Amara placed the pitcher, stepped back, and imagined a head CT glowing on a screen. Blood mapping a hidden bulge, a shadow pressing where language and balance compete. She tasted metal at the back of her tongue, that old hospital edge. When the meeting paused for a short break, she slipped out. In the hallway, she wrote more. Right-sided facial twitch, minor foot drag, perseveration, and intolerance to glare. She added a small star, the mark she used when patterns began to cohere. Elena stood near a window, watching sleet blur the parking lot into a sheet of mercury. Elena's mouth held a question she had asked for weeks. Amara gave the smallest nod, not reassurance but recognition. They both looked at the sky, then away. After the break, the storm deepened, and so did Nathan's hostility. A procurement manager flagged a shipping delay. Nathan said, "Fix it," then added, "You've been late 3 times this quarter." Even though the woman had been praised for hitting impossible dates, a muscle trembled at Nathan's temple. The woman tried to explain a highway closure. He cut her off again with a cold smile that broadcast control to the table while his body betrayed the effort required to perform it. By the final slide, he looked drained and hard. Like a tower holding against wind, long after good sense would have ordered evacuation. The junior analyst accidentally projected a personal note as he mirrored a screen one line about picking up a prescription, then corrected it in a panic. Nathan seized the moment. "Pack your desk," he said. Silence answered. The kid's mouth opened, then closed. Lila inhaled, then held it. Amara felt the decision crack through the room like lightning, blinding and pointless. She wanted to shout that cruelty would not stabilize a failing system, but shouting never fixed anything in an emergency. Procedure did. The meeting adjourned with everyone pretending they believed in fairness. Amara gathered cups and wiped the long sheen of the table's edge. She left a sealed water bottle within reach without comment and pushed her cart into the corridor. Before anyone could assign meaning to kindness, the elevators filled with wool coats and murmurs. Snow rattled like grit against the glass. Amara took the stairs, needing air that didn't smell like ambition. She stepped into the parking lot where the wind carried a sting sharp enough to clear the mind. A man in a navy parka leaned against a faded sedan, watching the clouds muscle across the valley. He nodded at her cart, then at the building. "Bad day up there?" he asked. His voice was warm sandpaper. Amara studied him, weighing risk. He offered a small smile. "Marcus Hayes," he said. "I used to read brains for a living, retired now. Came by 2 drop forms for my wife. She consults for trial audits." The name landed with a subtle thud of recognition. She had heard it in old hospital corridors, spoken with respect. She looked at the sky, then back at him. What would you say if someone displayed uneven pupils, light sensitivity, facial twitching, brief language loops, and a habit of calling pain a headache? He did not blink. "I would say they need imaging yesterday," he answered. Amara shook her head. "No vomiting in front of me. Recurrent temple rubbing. Balance glitches. Pride blocking common sense." He huffed a humorless laugh that turned white. "In the air. Pride is a poor sedative," he said. He pulled a pen and wrote a number on the back of an old clinic card. "If you can get him to listen, call. If you can't, find the person he trusts, and press." Sentinel headaches often come before catastrophe. People ignore them until the lights go out. She told him her name. He seemed to know it already, or maybe he just knew that the world runs on people like her even when buildings pretend otherwise. He lowered his voice. "If he fires someone today for nothing, it will be because fog inside his head needs a target." Amara pocketed the card. Wind shoved another wave of snow across the asphalt. She pictured the junior analyst's hollow face, then Nathan's pupils again, mismatched like misaligned stars. Inside, the day marched toward evening. She went back up. The analyst stood at his desk with a banker's box, colleagues avoiding his eyes as if unemployment were contagious. Amara wanted to say he had been used as a screen, a surface on which a powerful man could project fear, but that would not pay rent. She placed a small wrapped pastry on the box and kept moving. Then she called the number on the card and left a message with her observations, keeping it clinical, free of names. Back in the corridor, Nathan came toward her, Tylucent face drawn. He nearly walked into the wall at the corner, corrected late, and glared at her as if she had moved the building. "Stay out of executive spaces unless requested," he said. She looked at his eyes and saw the right one slow again to light. "Of course, sir," she said, stepping aside. Behind him, clouds stacked like dark ships over the valley, edges lit by a bruised strip of sun. Electricity went thin through the air. That strange pre-storm hush. She pressed a palm to the cool glass and let the chill drive focus into her bones. Documentation, ally, plan. She had 2 of the 3. The third would come when chance finally opened a door he kept closed. What would you do if you saw someone in danger but they refused to listen? Night slid over Bozeman on a blade of cold, while wind bullied powder across parking lines and rattled every seam in Caldwell Biotech. Amara left the building with her hood low, stopped by a street lamp and unfolded a sheet from her notebook. She wrote a letter she would not sign. Each line a clean observation, intermittent slur, an isochoria, stronger under bright light. Temple rubbing, brief balance, lost memory loops, glare aversion, right hand tremor, delayed swallow, facial twitch. On the same side, she added, one sentence, built to puncture denial without cruelty. These patterns can precede catastrophic events. And a practical note. Please encourage immediate evaluation. She addressed it to Alina Caldwell, sealed it, and walked 2 blocks through slicing air to drop it in a blue box. Snow hissed on the lid as it closed. Morning arrived with sky the color of tin and wind, skimming the Gallatin like steam from a split pipe. In the lobby, heaters worked, yet chill traveled with people as they shook snow from their shoulders. Amara pushed her cart down corridors, smelling of coffee and printer ink, reaching Nathan's office first to align chairs, refill mints, and place a new bottle of water within reach. She checked reflections in the window to catch angles he avoided. When he entered, tension rode his posture. He nodded at nothing, checked his watch twice, and reached for a mug he had not filled. His right eyelid fluttered as the lights brightened, the pupil lagging. He noticed her notice and scowled. "Don't loiter," he said. She rolled the cart just far enough to shift perspective. Resolve settled like a lead apron. If direct requests failed, quiet vigilance would carry the day. She split her shift into circuits, appearing to polish while recording details, rotating tasks so no pattern gave her away. The plan risked complaints, but the risk felt lighter than regret. He rehearsed a speech for a camera test and lost a phrase, covering with a joke that did not land. She wrote the time on a slip and pressed it flat. Near noon, Alina arrived with the calm of someone who has triaged fear before. She set down a thermos and spoke in a tone built for tense wards, slow, even, clear. She mentioned a neurologist she trusted. Nathan shook his head and said he would not be bullied. Pride loaded every syllable. He stepped, caught his toe, and braced on the desk. Amara stood near the door with the cloth and the composure of someone who knows emergencies seldom announce themselves politely. Alina glanced at her, gratitude flickering like heat over snow, and left with purpose. Downstairs, a courier piled envelopes for Alina at reception. Amara slid her letter into the bundle with a steady hand and returned to work. All afternoon, the wind rose. Flags along 7th Avenue stretched east. Snow lifted from rooftops and blew in sheets across frozen asphalt. Inside, meetings stacked without room to breathe. She watched through the glass the way trackers read prints and drift. The left foot dragged a fraction, the torso compensated, the jaw set whenever voices grew bright. She adjusted a frame to widen her angle. He squinted at a screen, rubbed the sore spot above his eye, knocked a pen to the floor, and left it there, longer than habit would allow, as though bending felt dangerous. She made a small circle beside the word light, her code for sensitivity crossed with fatigue. Lila arrived with a budget outline. He asked for numbers he already had, flipped a page twice, and raised his voice at a phrase he misread as a challenge. The room cooled. After she left, he stood still and breathed shallow. Amara polished a spotless pane outside his door, listening for words. At 3, she used a public terminal to send a second message to Elena's clinic email, listing red flags and urging action soon. She did not include names. Elena replied within minutes. "Thank you. I see it. I will try again." The sentence told Amara she was not alone. Back on the floor, Nathan scolded an employee for a harmless overlap, voice steady but breath short between sentences. The employee apologized, eyes dull with the fatigue of being blamed by a man who did not feel well and would not admit it. By evening, the glass groaned under gusts. Maintenance scattered salt, doors shuddered, and an alarm chirped and died. She made one last pass through executive spaces. Nathan stood by the window with the lights off, city glow washing his face in low silver. He pressed 2 fingers into his temple and whispered something she could not hear. She placed the water closer and stepped back. He stared at the bottle and did not touch it. She left without sound, walked down the service stairs into air that felt like ground glass, and crossed a lot where cars fishtailed and horns gave brief staccato bursts. Dr. Marcus Hayes rolled past with his window cracked and raised 2 fingers in greeting. She lifted a hand. He parked and got out with the care of a man trained to read small truths. She told him she had sent warnings. He nodded and said to keep notes ready because notes change minds when fear and ego collide. Silent pressure does. Not negotiate, he added, then drove off. That night, she marked a map of the building with routes that would let her pass Nathan's door, often without drawing attention. Every arrow costs a little courage. She paid anyway. Dawn came blue and brittle, shadows like iron on the snow. She arrived early, salted the service steps when maintenance ran late, and cleaned glass until it held the sky without a seam. Nathan entered, grunted a greeting, and moved to his desk with that same half-breath between steps. Her eyes adjusted, the way a camera does before capturing truth. Uneven pupils again, more marked than yesterday. He dimmed the monitor, read a paragraph out loud, stopped, restarted, and swapped 2 words without noticing. She did notice, wrote the time on a sticky note, tucked it under her sleeve, and smoothed the desk by touch because looking at furniture gave him an excuse to dismiss her. Elena returned mid-morning, snow glittering on her coat, cheeks raw from wind, jaw set. She closed the door and held up the anonymous letter and the email. She said the signs matched a serious risk and offered to drive him herself. He laughed without humor and said he would not be managed. His voice wobbled at the end. She looked at the wobble like a lab result and said she would wait in the lobby until he chose common sense. Then she left. He stared after her, humiliated by love he could not accept. Amara felt the room lose oxygen, even though the vents purred. She wiped a spotless sill while watching his reflection steady, tilt, steady. This would not hold forever. Her shift became an undercover operation. 1 pass at a time, steps measured, glances angled, patience loaded with urgency. Rules hung over her like icicles, yet she kept going because sometimes work is a disguise for duty. Montana wind clawed at the building while a drift swallowed a mile marker beyond the city limits. Inside, another drift moved through a man whose decisions governed paychecks and futures. She intended to keep watch until light broke or denial did, whichever arrived first. Inside Caldwell Biotech, the glass shone cold, chairs aligned like soldiers, microphones checked, the investor meeting seated and waiting for a performance. Nathan entered late, smiled tight, color drained to office paper white. He shook hands, thanked everyone for their faith, and began the arc he had rehearsed through countless quarters. He cleared his throat and gripped the chair, lowering into it though he preferred command from a perch. Amara watched the tiny shiver in his right fingers and the lopsided pupils under bright light, right slow, left narrow details. Most people miss because they are trained to trust tone, not tissue. Lila Bennett advanced a deck that promised steady growth. Nathan asked for the projections he had read the night before. Lila answered crisply, but he repeated the question in the same cadence, as if the first reply had evaporated. An investor from Denver leaned forward, heads up on regulatory timing. He asked. Nathan started with confidence, then referenced an outdated plan that was killed last quarter. A beat of silence settled, the kind that hides judgment under civility. He tried a self-deprecating line and mislaid the punch, vowels thickening at the edges. Amara polished a spotless carafe, using motion as disguise while the medic inside her mapped failure like a storm front. She marked the time on a slip-in. Her pocket, slur onset during Q2, retrieval miss, perseveration, and anisocoria under glare. Wind pressed at the windows, making the whole floor hum. The mountains looked like they had moved nearer, witnesses carved from ice. Nathan lifted a printed page, stared, lifted it again, then set it down as though the paper were at fault. Questions came faster. He answered with almost trite phrases that drifted off course and landed on supply chain chatter nobody had invited. Leela's jaw tightened. She glanced at Amara as if proximity itself were provocation. During a pause for coffee, Amara stepped into the hall and texted the number Dr. Marcus Hayes had given her. Slur repeat, memory gaps, pupil mismatch, balance, guarded. The reply came within seconds. Risk of rupture is real. Do not wait for permission. Involve the person he trusts. I can meet you at the ER. The word rupture tightened the hallway's air. She put the phone away and re-entered with the same invisible gait. Nathan returned to the head of the table, voice raised to reclaim ground, veins beating at his temple. He reached for water, missed the glass by a finger's width, and steadied the tremor by making a fist no one dared notice. Under the lights, one pupil stayed wide while the other pinched. Montana's high country threw blue shadows across the snow. The windows framed that hard beauty like an argument against denial. From her station by the sideboard, Amara heard him misname a division he had founded. The room pretended not to hear. She caught Leela near the door and tried one careful sentence. He needs a medical evaluation today. Leela's reply was a whisper shaved to steel. Facilities shouldn't hover during high stakes. Cleaning staff meddling distracts leadership. Meddling carried more heat than any heater could give. Amara let the insult pass because wounded pride never stabilized a failing patient. She returned to her cart and wrote another line, misnaming, irritability, executive function slip. The deck moved to valuations. A partner asked about the cash runway. Nathan gave an answer that sounded authoritative and wrong, flipping to digits without noticing. Chairs creaked, a jacket sleeve whispered against leather. He laughed and called it a long week. Amara felt the room choose the safer lie. She texted Hayes again, errors in recall and numbers. Mood brittle, motor drift slight to right leg. Light, intolerance, he answered. Last quiet interval. If wife present, use her now. Otherwise call emergency services when he refuses. She memorized the phrase last quiet interval. It sounded like a weather radio before a canyon closes. Alina arrived, with wind still in her coat and the calm of someone who had watched pressure-crush men who thought themselves immune. She stood at the glass for 10 seconds, studying him the way a nurse studies a monitor no one else sees. Amara moved toward her, keeping her voice low. She delivered data, not opinion. Slur, uneven pupils, word-finding failure, guarded gait, temple rubbing. Elena's eyes hardened with recognition and grief. She said thank you without moving her lips and walked inside. Nathan tried to wave her off with the same old pride. She took his wrist and counted a breath with him, then spoke in the tone that gets through when nothing else does. You are not well, she said. We need imaging today. He pulled back, furious at the suggestion and at the fear it named. Investors looked away, grateful to stare at phones. Lila hovered, torn between optics and conscience. Outside, the valley tightened under a new line of cloud, light flashing along the ridges like a blade. Nathan insisted he could finish. Elena did not argue numbers with a man losing nouns. She told the room the Q&A would be rescheduled and asked Lila to help clear seats. Lila's mouth thinned. She began guiding people out with polished apologies about scheduling conflicts and travel windows. Amara held the door and kept her rage on a leash. The kid from analysis paused on the threshold, looked at Nathan with a mixture of pity and fear, and left. The carpet recorded the retreat in soft tracks. When the door closed, Elena turned back to him. Her voice dropped to a steady line. You could measure a pulse against we go now, or I call an ambulance into this room. Nathan stared at the table as if it might conjure authority he could wear like armor. His mouth formed a sentence and lost it. He rose to fast, wobbled, caught the chair, and forced a grin that made everything worse. Amara stood at his flank without touching, ready to catch without turning the act into a spectacle. Hayes texted, I'm driving. 10 minutes, she answered, trying to exit, resistance high. Outside the windows, gusts braided spindrift into bright snakes that whipped across the lot. The mountains felt nearer still, old granite judges holding. Session Elena reached for his coat. She slid his arm into the sleeve, eyes never leaving his face. Amara tucked her notebook under her arm and felt the outline of every time stamp like ridges under her skin. I'll have a car brought to the private entrance, she said, voice lower, sharper, humbled by reality. Nathan started to protest. Amara opened the door to the corridor, where heated air met the draft and made a 2-degree truce. Down the hall, a window framed the Gallatin, a scrawl of river under ice, cottonwoods black against snow, mountains posted beyond like sentries. She thought of Hayes's warning as something more than a text, the last quiet interval. They walked, together, cautious and slow, 3 figures crossing gray carpet, while the conference room cooled behind them, charts still glowing on a screen that no longer mattered. In Amara's chest, the rhythm changed from observation to action. The old, emergency cadence, rising to meet the hour, heavy and exact, ready to carry whatever came next. Dawn seeped into Bozeman, like light poured through frost, thin gold feathering the ridges while the top floor of Caldwell Biotech tightened for a make-good presentation that never should have happened. Nathan strode in with a face scrubbed of doubt and a smile held together by pride. Investors lifted cups, Lila smoothed paper. The board arranged polite expressions. Amara hovered at the periphery with a cloth folded once and a notebook buried under liners. Heart disciplined to move. Slower than the room, Nathan opened clean, then snagged on a common term, skated over it with a laugh too bright, and pushed forward. A pen clicked, then fell still. The right corner of his mouth twitched. One pupil stayed wide, the other shrank. He reached for water, missed the rim, and pretended it was deliberate. A question landed about regulatory timing. He named a plan sunsetted months ago, snatched at the correction mid-air, and came up empty. Lila slid in with a flattering clarification that doubled. As Tria, he chuckled. The sound broke like a thread. He tried again, and a word he owned every day refused him. Silence sat between syllables. Outside, wind combed spindrift across the lot. The mountains leaned closer as if to hear. He pressed 2 fingers to his brow and restarted, slower, tongue-heavy, syllables blurred, a vowel dragged. His right hand opened and closed like a small trapped bird. Amara watched pupils fight light, saw his posture tip, heard the breath catch he did not know he gave. Notes pressed against her ribs like a blunt. Alarm. He stepped back, grazed the chair, dropped his pen, and grimaced without meaning to. The next word shattered into sound. Someone rose, then sat, etiquette wrestling with fear. Lila whispered his name. The board chair reached for a phone and froze, waiting for permission that would never come. Amara moved. She parked the cart, crossed the carpet with the nurse's gate, and spoke low. "Sir, sit if you can." He couldn't. His body locked, then folded, shoulder catching the table edge before gravity took the rest. Half his face flickered. His mouth worked without language. The room inhaled and forgot what came next. Amara knelt, rolled him to protect the airway, counted beats, felt a rapid pulse kick hard against skin. She measured light on his eyes, found that stubborn mismatch again, and set her voice to steady. "Space," she said. "Quiet. Call his wife now." She dialed Marcus Hayes with her free hand. He answered on the first ring. Status: aphasia, anisocoria, right facial twitch, sudden collapse, fast pulse, likely severe intracranial event, she said, stripped of ornament. 5 minutes, Hayes replied. Call emergency services. Nothing by mouth. Keep him still. I'll meet the medics. Alina hit the doorway before anyone finished a sentence. Coat open, hair pulled back, eyes already reading the scene. She dropped beside Amara, palm on Nathan's shoulder. "I'm here," she told him, voice pitched to reach across panic. He tried to shape a reply and produced a warped syllable that cut everyone in the room. Alina stroked his hair back, tears quiet, not staged. "Call Novecento Zionzi," she said to the board, tone flat with authority. "Use the private entrance and clear the hall." The chair finally moved, voice shaking as he relayed details. Amara gave the dispatcher floor, building onset, observed signs, and probable cause. Lila crouched opposite, polish drained from her face. "What do you need?" she asked, breath thin. "Room," Amara said, "and the truth." Hayes arrived with Winter, on his coat and a compact case in hand. He took one look and dropped to the carpet. "Neurological emergency," he said, pinning the moment to reality. He checked pupils, asked 4 times, tested response, then looked up at Amara. "History." She handed him the notebook, pages tight with dates, hours, signs, small stars, next to patterns that refused to be ignored. Lila read over his shoulder and went chalk white. The chair swallowed hard. People recognized the numbers. This was a ledger of warnings. "Transport now," Hayes said to Alina. "Possible aneurysmal bleed. Door to scan cannot wait." "We're moving," she answered, already coordinating with an efficiency honed on night shifts and bad news. Sirens grew from a thread, too. A rope pulling the city toward them. The elevator chimed. Paramedics slid through with a stretcher, bags thumping, boots squeaking on polished floor. Hayes fired a concise report. Collapse during speech, aphasia, pupil mismatch, right-sided facial involvement, guarded airway, onset noted, pressure pending, likely subarachnoid or intracerebral event, oxygen hissed. A cuff tightened, leads clipped. On a medic called out numbers that made Alina close her eyes for a heartbeat and then open them harder. Amara answered rapid questions, times headaches, light intolerance, balance slips, memory errors each, fact a stepping stone across a flood, straps cinched. Nathan twitched again, mouth fighting for shape and losing. Alina leaned close, whispering his name like a promise he could hold even if words left him. Amara slid the notebook into Elena's bag. "You may need this," she said. Alina squeezed her wrist, gratitude bright through shock. They moved. Doors opened. People pressed back. Silence walked ahead like a scout. Outside the private entrance, the day broke fully over the valley, ridges catching gold, windows throwing it across the snow. The ambulance yawned. Hayes climbed. In with the team, Alina followed, jaw set. Lila murmured something about meeting them, voice unsure. Confidence melted down to raw worry. Red strobes painted the glass and the stone. The siren tore the brittle morning as the rig bit into the road. Bozeman woke, hard plows grinding, exhaust lifting in white ribbons. A hawk riding a seam of wind over the river while steel and skill raced a clock. No one in that room could negotiate. The board spilled into the lobby with faces emptied of certainty. Lila stopped in front of Amara, guilt written across ash-pale skin. "I was wrong," she said. "I called it meddling." Amara said nothing. There was no time for rituals that soothed pride. Floors would still need cleaning after a life was saved or lost. The chair stepped close, hand shaking. "You kept notes," he said, voice rough. "You saw what we refused to see." Amara met his eyes, not to punish, only to keep the truth from sliding away. "Seeing is a job, too," she said. Wind tore a scrap of snow from the awning and spun it like confetti over asphalt while the ambulance vanished toward the hospital, where machines and hands might undo what ego almost finished. She stood in the cold and let the sting anchor her, then turned back inside, because resolve is work, and work keeps moving. Have you ever realized someone you ignored was your only hope? Morning, at Bozeman, Deaconess began with pale sunlight over the Gallatin. soft gold sliding across parking lots while breath clouded the air. An ambulance braked at the bay, and doors swung wide. Nurses flowed like a practiced river around the stretcher as Dr. Marcus Hayes delivered a clean handoff. Monitors blinked, alarms chirped, and a scan order raced through the system before doubt could slow it. Elena walked beside the gurney, fingers on Nathan's shoulder, voice steady enough to keep fear from stealing oxygen. Amara stood at the edge, sleeves rolled, ready to answer questions and then step back. A resident asked for onset times, triggers, and signs. She recited notes without polish, each detail pinned to a minute. CT showed what she feared, blood where none should be, a bright crescent over gray. The attending named it so no one could pretend otherwise. Aneurysm with acute bleed. Emergent intervention. Consent forms followed. Then a rush toward the suite where wires, coils, and hands trained by long nights turned panic into chance. Hayes touched Amara's arm. Your ledger cut through noise, he said. Elena's eyes held hard rooms. You held him up when pride dragged him down. Amara nodded and let the doors close. She waited in a corridor that hummed with vents and the murmur of families. Through the window, the valley opened under a sky scrubbed clean by wind. Cottonwoods framed the river. Beyond them, mountains sat massive and calm. A cart rattled by. She'd bought tea and did not drink it. Lila arrived, hair damp from snow, breath fogging. She looked smaller than her title. They said you kept notes, she whispered. Amara handed a copy. Lila read in silence, throat tight, eyes moving over timestamps that had tried for weeks to become a voice. I dismissed you, Lila said. I called it meddling. He could have died while I guarded the room from the person who saw him. Amara did not soften the truth. He needed care. Now he is getting it, she said. They sat on the bench and watched the Bridgers until a beeper called Leela to brief the board. The waiting stretched. Elena returned from a consult, shoulders squared, face tired and fierce. She sat beside Amara like a colleague. Endovascular coil, she said. The bulge sits where they can reach. Risk stays real, but odds favor. Skill. Her hands shook only when she poured coffee. The cup rattled, then settled. I keep thinking about how many chances were offered and refused, she added. Amara pictured the office glass reflecting winter peaks, while a man tried to outrun a vessel the size of a raindrop. Hours later, Hayes came out with a tired smile and a surgeon at his side. We secured the aneurysm, the surgeon said, bleed controlled. He will go to the ICU for close watch. The notes narrowed the time to diagnosis. That helped. Elena pressed both hands to her mouth, then pulled Amara into a hug that let gratitude breathe. The doctor nodded to Amara. Your documentation reads like a clean chart, he said. In the ICU, the world shrank to beeps, soft light, and the slow rise of a chest that refused stillness. Nathan slept with lines at his arm and a cuff squeezing. At intervals, his face looked gentler without the performance it wore behind glass. Elena stood at the rail. You stubborn, beautiful fool, she murmured. Hayes checked numbers, gave instructions, and stepped back. Amara stayed nearby, ready to leave if asked, content to witness proof that action beat delay. When sedation faded and thought returned in slow pieces, Nathan blinked at the ceiling. Words came in a whisper shaped by effort. He saw Elena first, and reached for her hand. He saw Hayes, and puzzled a moment while memory reattached. Then he saw Amara and frowned, not with anger, but with awe, at the path that led her here. Elena told him about the letter, the emails, the signs that stacked against false comfort, the call to dispatch, and the ride that followed. He closed his eyes and let the facts wash through what remained of denial. I was cruel, he said. I called you a janitor as if that erased your mind. Amara did not step closer. You are in danger, she said. Now you are here. Hayes explained sentinel headaches and how hurry helps pride hide warning lights. Nathan listened, chastened and quiet. News moved across the company like wind over open ground. The board met in a dull room with a view painted by snow and weak sun. Leela stood at the head, voice stripped of varnish. She explained the collapse, the scan, the procedure, and then the notes. She said the list was made by the woman they had trained themselves not to see. Faces changed as each line landed. The chair spoke about policy and bias with the tremor of someone who had watched a cost he could not justify. He ordered an outside review and a channel for frontline workers to report urgent concerns. That afternoon, several members came to the hospital with bouquets and careful promises. Amara accepted the flowers for the nurses' station and left the promises to time. By evening, the storm eased. A thin band of sun slid under the clouds and warmed the valley with light. From the ICU window, the river looked patient, dark water cutting an honest path through ice. Elena read an email from a compliance officer who had dug into the file that ended Amara's nursing career. The file was thin. A missing medication count was traced to a cart with a broken latch, but the correction never reached the committee. We will clear the record, Elena said. It will not repay the years, but the truth will be on paper. Amara felt old. Grief stepped forward and then sit. She took a breath that did not have to prove anything. Over the days, Nathan gained strength. Speech returned with slight slowness that made him listen more and press less. He learned what had unfolded while he fought a storm inside his skull. Elena teased him about retirement, then kissed his brow and said she loved him too much to let him run again. When he could sit by the window, he asked to speak with Amara alone. She pulled a seat close but kept a small distance. He thanked her and asked about her past. She told the short version, the oath she kept even when a badge became a mop handle. He nodded. "I want to make it right," he said. "Not with a title, but with trust and change." She said change begins by seeing. On the morning he left the ICU, frost laced the lawn, and a hawk lifted from a cottonwood. The ranges glowed in thin light. The city breathed after snow. In that calm, the chaos of the week felt finished. Amara walked toward the exit for coffee. Outside, air bit her cheeks and cleared weight from her chest. The valley reached in every direction, not triumphant, just present. Work now meant truth with witnesses and a future shaped by humility and care. She stood a minute, then went back to work. The first clear night after surgery arrived, like a promise stitched across cold air, and Bozeman answered with stars pinned over the bridges, each one sharp as a bell note. Nathan sat by the hospital window with a blanket on his lap and the careful posture of a man who finally understands how close the drop had been. Elena rested a hand on his shoulder, steady and warm, while machines kept a soft metronome in the corner. When Amara stepped through the doorway, he tried to stand, paused for balance, and chose honesty over pride. Tears brightened his eyes. He said he remembered the room, the fall, and then her voice cutting through the noise. He said she had seen what he refused to see and that she had saved his life. Amara shook her head. She said a circle had closed and she had pushed the latch, and that many hands had done the rest. Elena smiled and handed him water he could now hold without a tremor. Dr. Hayes reviewed labs, approved a short walk, and left them to talk. Nathan looked past the glass to the Gallatin, dark as ink under the moon, then back to the woman he had called janitor like a verdict. He said he was sorry for the pride that silenced the witness. She drew a breath that belonged to no one but herself, and said she did not trade care for permission. He asked about the rumor that bent her career and listened as she sketched the audit, the broken latch, and the committee that preferred a tidy story over correction. He closed his eyes, then opened them with a changed light and said the record would be fixed in ink. 2 days later, discharge came with a plan for scans, and rest frost-etched the walkways, and the ranges glowed blue at the edges. A company car brought them home, then turned toward Caldwell Biotech for a meeting. Elena insisted should happen before Habit rebuilt walls. In the boardroom, the glass still shone, but the room felt different. Lila stood with a folder of actions. Instead of excuses, she apologized without showing, asked to share Amara's notes as a case study on listening, and took responsibility for guarding optics while missing danger. The chair announced a program built with outside partners, not slogans, an anonymous safety fund open to every worker, a council empowered to escalate urgent concerns, yearly clinical training, and a scholarship for first-generation students who choose care work. Dr. Hayes agreed to advise. Elena offered to teach sessions on the signs people overlook. Nathan, pale but present, signed the charter and then did something harder. He opened the floor and listened. Stories came. Some brief, some raw. People spoke about small dismissals growing into lost time and lost dignity. He let silence sit where it needed to sit. Afterward, he asked Amara to join as director of clinical training, a position crafted overnight with salary, staff, and influence. The offer rang with respect, not pity. She held it, weighed it, and pictured nights when she moved through halls, like a quiet tide, catching patterns that titles cannot compel. A new role carried honor, yet it would pull her away from the edges where she feels most useful. She chose a middle path. She would lead workshops for mornings each month, revise protocols, and keep her route through executive spaces where small changes tend to whisper first. Leela nodded and promised support. Nathan accepted the terms with relief that looked a lot like respect. He said presence saved him, and that he wanted that presence exactly where she wished to place it. Paper moved quickly when contrition met leverage. Legal reopened the old file and issued a formal correction with signatures from the board and the hospital committee that had failed her. The letter arrived on plain stock, black type on white, clipped sentences that felt like rain after fire. Amara read it once, folded it, and slid it behind a family photo on her dresser. She did not chase applause. She carried on. In the weeks that followed, winter thinned. On mornings when ice lay a brittle film over the lot, she salted the steps, and then took a classroom. She held up common myths and replaced them with facts: a thunderclap headache, an unsteady gait, sudden language trouble, pupils that refuse to match, the lie of toughness that keeps people from calling for help. Workers filled chairs, some skeptical, some eager, most remarkably quiet by the end. No slide deck sold the message better than her voice and the ledger that had led a team to act in time. Hayes spoke on anatomy with a chalk sketch that resembled a canyon and a river under pressure. Alina told stories that landed like soft hammers. Nathan introduced sessions without branding, thanked the team, and sat in the back row with a notebook. After class, he walked the long glass with measured steps. He stopped often, not from weakness, but because pausing had become an ethic. People met his eye, and he met theirs. Something inside the company shifted a degree each day, enough to change routes and habits without breaking what still worked. Amara kept to her route with a new badge that did not change the way she held a cloth or read a room. She found a cufflink near reception and set it on a desk. She noticed a developer's pallor and left tea plus a note to hydrate. She sat with a lab tech whose sideways drift needed a scan that thankfully ruled out crisis. Her work stayed ordinary, on its surface, radical in its attention. One evening, Nathan called a gathering on the roof. Coats buttoned and hands in pockets, they watched the sky turn velvet while the Gallatin threaded black between fields. He thanked the team for holding him to a higher standard and thanked Amara for building it without applause. He announced scholarship recipients from Helena and Browning, letters full of roads that needed a hand, and he cried without hiding it. The wind took the sound thin and bright. Later, Alina pressed an envelope into Amara's palm, confirming reinstatement of her professional standing should she ever seek it. Amara smiled and said she might teach more one day, but for now, she would keep the cart, the keys, and the quiet passes that let her see what others overlook. Alina understood. Hayes did too. Leela likewise. Under a hard, bright sky, she walked home along Main, boots crisp on frozen grit, lungs filled with cold that tasted of metal and pine. Porch lights glowing while the city softened. She did not make a wish. She made a vow to keep paying attention. At dawn, she unlocked the service door, rolled the cart, set right a tilted frame, and watched first light sling across the floor in pale bars. The route ahead looked simple and good, and the building felt less like a mirror and more like a place where people could see. Stars rose early over the valley that night, silver scattered on black, and hope felt as wide as the plain. What's the cost of underestimating someone's worth? They put the lights low and the flag high, and a hall in Washington filled with people who had once believed heroism wore only suits, lab coats, and medals. Inside, folded with care, rested a blue work shirt, black slacks, soft soles, and a badge. Stamped Amara Thompson, the laminate creased from years riding in a pocket next to keys. When the announcer spoke her name, the room rose. Amara walked out in a simple dress Alina had pressed that morning, hair braided, shoulders steady, eyes clear. Nathan stood from the front row with Hayes and Lila, his applause slow and raw. He told the story without polish. A cleaner who watched, documented, spoke, and would not let pride write a death notice. Amara touched the glass with 2 fingers, then took the podium. She said, attention is a form of love, that care can travel through a rag and a notebook as surely as through a scanner. She did not ask for sympathy. She asked for practice. Nathan cleared his throat and spoke briefly. He did not rehearse. He said he had nearly traded his life for vanity, then lived because the person he had treated as a fixture saw him as a human being. His voice broke. He asked the audience to honor watchfulness, wherever it appears, especially in those who earn the least. At Caldwell Biotech, the lobby held a small podium and too many cameras. Nathan faced them with Alina at his side and Hayes one step back. He announced he would step away from leadership duties and serve as board chair while a new team took on daily responsibilities. He pledged personal funds to endow the Amara Thompson Scholarship for Quiet Excellence, designed for first-generation students and overlooked workers who wanted to enter care fields. The scholarship would cover tuition, housing, and travel for rotations in rural clinics. Lila described reforms at the company, a council with authority to escalate urgent concerns from any floor. Paid time for safety training, anonymous channels that protect messengers, translation help, and audits that examine bias before it injures people. Reporters asked Amara to describe how it felt to see her uniform behind glass. She said the shirt mattered because a life had stayed, not because her name traveled. She said she would keep teaching workshops each month and keep her route, because corridors speak earlier than boardrooms. She told him to keep notes, keep courage, and call for help even when status shakes its head. Fiddle and piano braided old songs with new hope. Hayes told the crowd her ledger had been cleaner than many charts. Alina read from a letter that cleared the old accusation against Amara, and the room let out a breath that had waited years. Nathan admitted he had learned more from silence than from applause. Lila apologized without spin and promised to keep doors open even when it hurt her pride. In the weeks after the ceremony, applications poured in. Letters arrived from Browning, Helena, Billings, and towns scattered like sparks across the High Line. A grocer from Butte described feigning spells at a register and a supervisor who listened because a training video had taught him what a slur can mean. The first scholarship class met in Bozeman as summer pushed snow into gullies. They filled a classroom with nervous energy and stubborn hope. Amara taught the opening session with Alina. They passed around a lamp and showed how pupils behave when pressure lies. Hayes drew a brain on a whiteboard like a canyon cut by a river and explained what happens when a wall gives. Janitors, coders, receptionists, drivers, and interns sat side by side and practiced calling for help in voices that did not shake. Caldwell Biotech changed in small, durable ways. The council met every month and published summaries. The company added a rule that any worker could call a medical timeout without consequence. New supervisors learned to ask better questions before they raised their voices. A wall near the lobby carried a collage of shoes, boots, heels, clogs, sneakers. A plaque read, "Pay attention to who keeps you alive." Some cried. Mara kept her route. She set right a tilted frame, left tea for a lab tech who looked drained, and strolled through executive halls where once she had moved like air. She still wrote times on slips when something looked wrong. She still called a nurse when a visitor's smile hit a wobble. She still believed dignity comes from work well done, not from a title. She met scholarship students for coffee and asked what they needed more than praise. News of her case traveled farther than she expected. Letters came from school nurses, warehouse crews, and hotel teams in other states. They told her about the warning signs that were ignored and the warning signs that were heard. She replied when she could and kept the letters in a shoebox lined with brown paper. Fame tried to pull her toward a stage. She chose hallways, classrooms, and the river path after supper, where she counted geese and remembered to breathe. On the anniversary of the collapse, the company invited staff to the roof at dusk. People stood with cups, coats zipped high. Nathan thanked the paramedics by name. Lila announced the new scholarship cohort and read a note from a student who planned to return to the Crow Reservation as a trauma nurse. Hayes asked for a minute of quiet for the lives saved because someone paid attention. Amara stepped toward the edge and looked at the Gallatin, a dark ribbon through fields, and at mountains lifting the last light like bowls. Stars came on one by one until the sky felt stitched with fire. The glass towers mirrored the glow and then softened, less proud, more humane. Elena slipped an arm through Amara's and said the night looked like a promise. Nathan stood a little behind them, a man still learning gratitude on the far side of ego. He had stepped back, and the company had not fallen. It had grown steadier because more people carried the work. The air smelled of cold stone and pine. A train called from the edge of town. Amara thought about the uniform in the glass case and the badge that once opened only supply rooms. She thought about notes written in a stairwell and the ambulance door closing on a morning that might have been broken. She decided, again, to stay close to the ground, where footsteps, breath, and small tremors tell their truths first. She lifted her face to the stars that Montana scatters like seeds and let the quiet do what it always does when people make room for it. Before they went back down the stairwell, she turned to the small camera pointed at the skyline and spoke. Plainly, we all know someone who keeps the world running without a podium. We all know someone whose warning could save a life. Please share this story with them. Please share it with your family, your crew, your bosses, your friends. Follow for the next chapter, because the work is not done. What happened next will shock you. Subscribe to hear more stories of unsung heroes who changed the world.